Shavua Tov, Chanan.
Shavua Tov. Shavua Tov. Okay. Good way to start the week, huh?
As always. And that as many people as positive as we know are testing negative, that's even a better way to start the week.
Yeah, not me. I tested positive. I'm getting over it here. So,
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
yeah. So I'm hoping that the worst is over. I've been very fatigued. It's not sure how I got it, but a few possibilities. But I was definitely sick.
Ooh. How long ago did you get sick?
It was Sunday night, 2 weeks ago, that I started feeling sick.
Wow.
Yeah. And by Monday morning, I knew I wasn't going into work. So, yeah. I'm not sure. Either my son, he also got it, less severe than me. And also some people I know at school got it. So one of the two places. But, it's been, right now it's like mostly fatigue. That's the big problem. But
yeah, that is your energy level is really.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no spring chicken here, so and still coughing a little bit, but all right, it should be the worst.
What's your shul doing about masks? Is everybody masked?
Oh, the shul, yes, the shul has been doing that since I don't know, October or something. September, October, you have to wear a mask in the shul. So, which is good.
People are complying.
People are complying, yes. It is understood that you will wear a mask. It's not like optional. And people comply, yes. There's some other shuls that have been less willing to comply and stuff. And Riverdale Jewish Center, which was pretty spotty on it. They just instituted like a mask requirement like a few weeks ago. And I stopped davening there because I wasn't feeling comfortable there. So, yeah, our shul has been. I mean, people are there's compliance. So yeah,
good.
Believe in science. Yeah.
I'm a little late. Looks like everyone's here already. So maybe I'm just
on time. We're early.
You said around 6:10. It's 6:11. We're good.
So it's actually a pretty short daf today, so you get some evening back. But today's daf is daf chaf, and my voice is not great, but thankfully you're not in the same room as me, so it's a good thing. Daf chaf. So we had a long week of Megilah. Hopefully everyone joined and learned a lot about the details, very practical details. He said he got up to the 2 dots, so I'll start from there because it's actually a middle of a sugya till there.
Yeah, I know. He didn't get to the Mishnah.
That's okay. It's very short daf, to be very honest.
That's where we all stopped.
But let me just give the quick, just in case anyone didn't want to do every daf. Right, there's a machloket in the Mishnah, the preceding Mishnah, about the Mishnah says Akol ksherim lekrot et Megilah. Everyone is kosher to read the Megilah. We didn't discuss in this Mishnah whether that includes women, but it does, right? And we discussed that earlier in the Masechet. And there was, a different discussion about that. But this Mishnah says, except for Cheresh Shota v'Katan. And so we had a very interesting, the Rabbi Yehuda disagreed about a Katan, and that's what we are going to discuss a little bit today. about whether, a katan is absolutely allowed to or not allowed to. But interestingly, and this was yesterday's daf, in discussing a chirish, so a chirish literally means, we usually translate as deaf mute, right? So particularly in those times, obviously it was if you couldn't hear, it was very difficult to learn how to speak, right? There was not a lot of speech therapy, I guess. And so generally that went together, but of course those are not the same thing. And so the question in our Mishnah, of course, was if a person's reading the Megillah and they're deaf, they have to be able to speak. Or if they're mute, they can't read the Megillah. So clearly we were talking about a chirish who's not the classic chirish, not a deaf mute, but just deaf. There's a very interesting halachic difference between that. So there was a machloket, and I think halacha, it's not so clear how we paskin, right? Our Mishnah makes it sound like they're excluded, but the way we concluded this, one interpretation was that it's only the chatchila. But bidi avad, if you read the Megillah and a person is deaf, so they can't hear what they're reading, that bidi avad, they might be yotze. It's very interesting because the poskim discuss, there's a machloket about that, of course, but they discuss whether how it's different than shofar, right? Because with the shofar, right, remember the bracha we make on the Megillah is to read the Megillah, right? Al mikra Megillah, reading it. The bracha we make on shofar is l'shmoa kol shofar, right? Is to hear it. And so the poskim seem to paskin that although Megillah you probably could be yotze bidi avad if you can't hear it, just because you can read it. Shofar is not the case, right? If you can't hear the shofar you're blowing, if you're deaf, you can't be yotze motze other people in the shofar. Very interesting. And the opposite might be true if you couldn't read, but you could blow a shofar, right? Let's say you don't know how to read, but you're mute, but you can make a sound.
If you're deaf, you have no obligation to because you can't fulfill it. So
that's also not so clear, right? Remember, the classic person we talk about who's deaf is one who cannot hear or read.
Right.
Or speak, not read,
Yeah.
right? Speak, and they're patur from mitzvot because they're thought to be not b'nei dat. If a person is able to read but not hear, they're probably chayiv in mitzvot, and that's where we said yesterday, according to one opinion, that b'di avad, if they read the Megillah, they would be motzi other people. So they are chayiv. But they can't read it lechatchila, but they are chayiv to do it b'di avad. So that was that. Today, of the two dots, Rabbi Yehuda was machshir b'katan. Right, so the Tanakama excluded a katan. Rabbi Yehuda was machshir b'katan, and we said yesterday, if you recall, one interpretation was that it depended on whether the katan was a yigeh chinuch, right? That if the katan was a yigeh chinuch, then that's Rabbi Yehuda said it was kosher. But if they weren't a yigeh chinuch, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that they can't read it. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, says Rabbi Yehuda, katan hayiti. I remember being, a kid, being 10 years old. V'kariti l'malam Rabbi Tarfon v'tzkin in Belud. I remember standing above, I'm not exactly sure where they were above, maybe there's a balcony or, it was a bima, and I read the Megillah in front of Rabbi Tarfon and the Zkanim in Lud. So I remember practically doing this. And so how could you argue with me? I did it. Amar, they said to him, Amar lo emevi and Rayim in a katan. We can't prove that because we don't believe you, right? You said you remember doing this, you were 10 years old. You might have remembered it wrong. Maybe they read it again afterwards. You're not reliable. That's the simplest explanation. Tanya, another Braita says, I'm a Rebbe. Rebbe was, a pretty famous guy, said, Katan Hayiti, I remember when I was a kid, I was 10, Vikariti Lamalam Rebbe Yehuda. And I remember reading it to Rebbe Yehuda. So these are all giving practical testimony that it happened. Amrullah, they said, well, Emevi and Rayim in a matir. You can't prove it from the person who says you're allowed to do it. Rebbe Yehuda is the time in the Mishnah who says it's okay. So sure, Rebbe Yehuda let you read it, but no one else would let you read it, right? You're only there because Rebbe Yehuda let you do it. But that's no proof that the Chachamim paskin that way. That's just a practical thing because Rabbi Yehuda lets you do it. It says, why didn't they say the same answer to him? That you were a kid, we don't trust you. It says, they said one and more, meaning an additional reason. First of all, you were a katan, and we don't trust your edut. You probably, again, not that we don't trust you necessarily, which we don't, but that you might not understand the circumstance, right? People think, you thought you understood what was happening. You were 10 years old. We don't trust that you necessarily understood. The od afilu gadola yita ein mivin rayim in a matir. Certainly, second of all, because you said you read it in front of Rabbi Yehuda, we can't prove from Rabbi Yehuda that you're allowed to do it because that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. So at the end of the day, our Mishnah does not clarify, right? Clearly, there were people who read it, and Rabbi Yehuda clearly permitted it. The Tanakama seems to say you're not allowed to read it, and so we don't have a conclusion la halacha. There's a big debate among the poskim about this, right? Some seem to possibly like Rabbi Yehuda because we brought stories like him in the Gemara. Others quote the Rambam. I think many of the Rush, the Rush for sure, quote our Mishnah without editorializing it. In which case, presumably you go at the Tanna Kama because that's the Rabbim, that's the Rabbanan. And a Katan should not read. The big question, of course, is why. Right? Why wouldn't a Katan be allowed to read for adults? So in general, right? Remember the basic principle I gave my bar mitzvah drasha about this, by the way. So the general principle, now that it's coming back to me, the general principle, of course, is that you can only be motzi someone else if you're also required to do the mitzvah, right? So a katan only is a chiyuv midrabanan. And so the famous sugya in brachot, which we learned, I guess, a year ago or so, was about Birkat HaMazon, right? The Mishnah, the Gemara talks in Birkat HaMazon, Daf Chaf, I think, in brachot, about whether a katan, there it also talks about women, whether they can be motzi a man in Birkat HaMazon, and the discussion was that they're chayiv midoraita, a katan is only chayiv midrabanan, right? So whether a person chayiv midrabanan can be motzi a doraita, and the Gemara in brachot says that you can, if the adult, the man, only ate a kazayit, because then they're only chayiv midrabanan for benching. So the kid is a midrabanan to bench. The adult only is chayiv midrabanan because they ate a small shear, and so the kid can be motzi the adult. So they ask the same question here. Why is, if the mitzvah of Megilah is midrabanan, which it clearly is, and a katan is chayiv in chinuch midrabanan, why can't the katan is chayiv midrabanan be yotzei the adult? And so the obvious answer that's brought, there are many answers. And this is not the bar mitzvah drasha, but the obvious answer that the Beit Yosef quotes is that this is two drabanans, right? It's when we say a kid is chayiv in drabanan, it's they're like the doraita, meaning if a kid ate enough food, they're chayiv in chinuch like a doraita. But by Megilah, it's basically a drabanan chiyuv of chinuch on a mitzvah drabanan of reading the Megilah, whereas the adult has one drabanan, which is a chiyuv drabanan to read the Megilah. And so you can't have the language of the Beit Yosef, is you can't have two drabanans come and be yotzei one drabanan, right? So that's a very straightforward answer. There are many other answers as to why that is, but it's a very important discussion.
But one of the things that Rabbi Yehuda actually said yesterday, he makes the distinction in between two different kinds of ktanim. The one that actually has already learned and has a specific amount of knowledge, and the one that doesn't know because he's too small and he wouldn't be able to know. So, I know that amongst Fardim, for example, we teach our kids to start reading Torah early as 8 years old, if they're capable of doing it, and they're allowed to read in in a minyan. If they're knowledgeable enough that they're going to be doing a good job, then we allow them to do it. I'm not saying that this is halacha or anything. I'm just saying that this is a distinction that Rabbi Yehuda made yesterday. So,
right. So I 100%. I just want to be clear. We're talking only a katan who's igia lechinuch, who's old enough to do it. That's what Rashi. It was a very interesting Rashi yesterday about what you call katan igia lechinuch. Rashi said yesterday 9 or 10, right?
Right.
Which is interesting because elsewhere, like in Sukkah, Rashi says 5 or 6, right? Or more. I think he said younger because the shear is different. Obviously, it doesn't take a lot of brains to sit in a sukkah, right? But it takes a lot more intellect to read a Megillah. But we're actually going to discuss Torah reading at the end of the Masechet, so we'll get there. But this is certainly, even assuming that the kid is a Giyah L'Chinuch, can they be Motzi Rabbim? And the custom is not to do it. Is that a child should not read for adults.
Okay.
Continues the Gemara, the Mishnah. The next halacha in the middle of the page of Daf Chaf is Ein Korinit HaMegilah. You're not allowed to read the Megillah, of course, during the day. Remember, you read the Megillah at night and at day, but the mitzvah of the day Megillah, which is the main mitzvah, according to most, you can't read the Megillah or do milah, lo malin, do a circumcision. The lo tovlin, someone has a mitzvah to go to the mikvah, let's say, they were azav or tamei, and they have to sit for 7 days and go to the mikvah on the 8th day. You can't go to the mikvah, right? Remember, of course, a woman after Nida goes at night. So this is talking about circumstances where you go during the day. The lo mazin, you don't sprinkle from the para duma, right? The mechatat. V'chein, meaning we're going to say in a second, you can't do all these things when it's night. You can only do them during the day. V'chein shomer yom keneged yom, and so too a person who's watching one day keneged another day. And this gets us into a halacha from Nida, which, if you recall, and again, I'll do the brief version here, but there's a lot more to talk about. If a person, right, there's a halacha in the Torah about a nida, which is a very specific circumstance of menstruation. But there's a separate halacha right next to that that talks about a zav or a zava, which can be a man or a woman, who has some kind of seminal or some kind of discharge. And that person, if they see it once, they're called a zav katana or zav katan, I guess. And they are tamei until they go to the mikvah. And they're shomeret yom keneged yom, because if they end up seeing again the next day, and again the third day for a woman and 2 days for a man, they become a zava gedolah and they become tamei for 7 days. So after day number 1, you don't know yet if you're going to be tamei for 7 days, right? You have to wait till the next day. If the next day nothing happens, then you become tahar unless something happens. So that person has to go to the mikvah, but the same is true. They only go during the day. Lo titvol ad shetanetza chama. They only go to the mikvah when the sun rises. Netza chama, which is what we call sunrise. So that's the time you can start reading the Megilah, the time you can do all these mitzvot. However, says our Mishnah, kulan sha'asu mishalah amud hashachar kasher. If you do it earlier, if you do it from the first, what we call dawn, I think, right? Allah amud hashachar, when the rays of the light come up, even though the sun is not broken over the horizon, which is, depending on the time of year, somewhere between 45 maybe to 90 minutes before, right? It depends on where you are in the time of the year. You're Yotze. So b'diavad, you can do all these things from Amud HaShachar, but the main time is Neitz HaChama, from the sun shining. Says Megilah. Now, what's the proof for all these things that they have to happen during the day? The Amar Quran, we're going to quote a pasuk for each one. It says, Hayamim ha'ela niskarim v'nasim. So it says Yamim, right? It didn't have to say Yamim, it's extra. B'yom in b'layla lo. It says, well, that implies you only read the Megillah during the day. Lema David Yufti Yeshua ben Levi. Maybe this is against Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi 2 weeks ago, in the beginning of the Masechet, Chayav Adam Likrota Megillah b'layla u'shnoto b'yom. That you have to read the Megillah at night and repeat it during the day. So this implies you only do it during the day. That's why no, you can do it at night and the day, but the day one has to be during the day. And during the day means after the sun rises, from Amud HaShachar, from Neitz HaChama, Kikatani Adiyom. Okay, the next thing we said was Lo Malin. You don't do circumcision. Dichtiv Bayom Hashmini Yimo. It says very clearly the day. So it has to be during the day and not at night. Velo Tovlin, Velo Mazin. How do you know that you don't do tefillah and you don't do haza'ah of the water of the paraduma during the day? Dichtiv Hiza Tahara Tamei. And it's then, if you go further, it says Bayom Hashvi'i. And so it says Yom. And again, that means during the day. V'itkish tefillah la'azayah. We compare the tefillah going to the mikvah to the sprinkle. The same thing is true, is that if a person sees is a zav or a zava, and they have a discharge, so they're tamei for the rest of that day, and then the next day they go to the mikvah. So when they go to the mikvah the next day, they only do it in the morning. This is where pshita, of course. You just quoted the words just before that, right? Was lo tovlin. You don't go to the mikvah except during the day. So why in the world would you think that this zav or zava is different? Why would that be any different? Because no, I would have thought it would be different because it's true. I need to tell you that they only do it during the day. I would have thought that it's as if, like I said, this first seeing of a zav, and why is that different? Because the first sight of a zav is similar to a balkari. It's talking specifically about the man. Right, when a man sees, which is different than a man and a woman, and again, we'll go into this in Nida in 5 years, but the reason it's different by men and women, just or at least the mechanism, is that when a woman has a discharge, has blood, it's not clear what that is, and it depends on the calendar, right? So this is what the Gemara in Nida, we don't observe this nowadays because we think people are too confused to figure it out, but in the pasuk, that if a woman is in her cycle and she sees blood, she becomes a nida, she becomes a menstruating woman, right? If she sees blood again, she doesn't become a zava. And if she has a discharge, she's not a zava. It's only for 7 days she's a nida. Then the next 11 days are considered to be yemei zivut. And if she sees blood during those days or other discharge, she becomes a potential zava if she sees it 3 days in a row. After 18 days have passed, if she sees blood, she's a nida again, right? So it goes back to the beginning. So for a woman, it depends very much on the calendar. And for those 11 days, that's the status. For a man, there's obviously no equivalent. There's no expected discharge, right? So anytime a man has a discharge, a bloody discharge, he becomes day one of Zav, right? And that's different than day one of a Zava for a woman. In that case, he actually does not wait till the next morning to go to the mikvah. He can go to the mikvah later that day. We'll see when later that day. So Ri'iyah Rishona Shel Zav is Itkish Lebal Keri. That's like a man who has seminal discharge, which is also tamei, but by Balkari, he goes to the mikvah. Well, we'll read during the day. Now, why is that comparison? Because it says in the pasuk, Zot Torat Hazav. This is the story. This is the halacha of a zav. The asher tetzei mimenu shechvat zera. It compares him to one who sees semen, or has ejaculation. Ma Balkari tovel biyom. So asking, well, if that's the case, a Balkari is tamei, they go to the mikvah right away and they become tahar. A person's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and they're balkari, then they go to the mikvah and they're tahar at 3 o'clock. So maybe hainami l'tfol biyume. So maybe a person who's a zav, a man who's a zav, should go to the mikvah on the same day. And it says, and this is a question. The gears is a little bit off here. Habi mama lo matzi tavla, but you can't go during the day. Tichtiv, because it says in the pasuk 3 lines from the bottom, kol yemei zova. All the days of his zav, kimishkav nidata yela. He should be like a nida. And just like a nida, remember, only goes to the mikvah after the day. So too, a zav only goes after the day. Says, well, at least belayla miyot li'aved, right? At least, maybe you would have thought that a man who's a zav, can go to the mikvah that night, just like a nida, right? He would wait some of the night, 10 minutes, an hour. He would mixat shimor v'titzmal. And he would go to the mikvah. So you might have thought that this is a specific circumstance, that because a zav, a male zav on day one is similar to a balkari, and a balkari does not have to wait till the end of the day, so that maybe the zav also does not have to wait till the next morning, like every other tefillah, except for nida. Kamash malan, like even the bai svira, since you at least have to count it, right? Because you have to count, because if it's 2 days or 3 days, you're going to become a major zav. Then Sfira b'yemamahi. Sfira requires day. And so in order to count that day, you basically have to wait all night. And you can only the next morning say, okay, the day is up. I didn't have anything yet today. It's 8 a.m. in the morning or 6 a.m. in the morning. And go to the mikvah and become tahar. And just to clarify, if later in that day, that man has another discharge, then that becomes day 2 of his zav. And then he would have to count that one as well. Continues the Gemara on the top of Tafchaf Amabet, the top line. The Kulan, this is very practical, this halacha. The Kulan sha'asu mi'ashala amud hashachar kasher. If you do it earlier, if you do it from the time of amud hashachar, even though you're not supposed to, you're yotzei. So let's say you got to go on a trip, you got to read the Megilah, or do a Brit Milah, right? Let's say you've got to get out of there or something. The earliest you can do it is from amud hashachar. How do you know that? We said they used the word yom all these times. How do you know that Yom applies when the sun is not shining? Remember, Amud HaShachar is dawn. There's no sun yet. So how do you know that Yom describes even if the sun is not out yet? Amar Rava, well, Amar Kra, first pasuk, right? Or beginning of the Torah, not the first pasuk, but Vayikra Elohim La'ar Yom. Hashem called the light day. What does that mean? You don't have to have a sun to be the day. L'meir uba karu Yom. Once this light is coming, it's day. So that day is not defined by the sun. You can have the day as long as it's getting bright. And so if it could be a half hour before sunrise, but it's already getting bright on the eastern front, that's called day. That's what Hashem called Yom. Says the Gemara El Miata, the next words in the pasuk are, well, the choshech karalayla, right? When it gets dark, he called it night, which implies l'machshich uba karalayla. Once it starts getting dusky, right, and the sun's going down, it's called the nighttime. And that's not true. Our halacha is that it's not considered night until stars come out. So you can't say that once it's getting darker in the afternoon or a half hour before, that's the night. The night is not until stars, until it's very dark, right? So how do you know that you obviously can't read this pasuk that way, that as it's getting darker, it's called night, and as it's getting lighter, it's called day? You're right, says the Gemara. Okay, we got another pasuk. The pasuk says, this is a pasuk in Ketuvim, right, in Sefer Nehemiah. It says, remember they were, the background, right, they were struggling to build the Beit HaMikdash because the people in the community, Sanballat, and all the people were fighting against them, right? There was the locals, or they weren't really locals, but the people around there didn't want them to build it. So they described a situation where, this is now a quote, Anachnu osim b'melacha, we are doing work to build the walls of the Beit of Yerushalayim, really, in the Beit HaMikdash. V'chitzim machzikim b'ramachim, and we are carrying our shields and our spears, right? Our arrows, sorry, and our spears all day because we're getting attacked. Me'alot hashachar tzit kuchavim. So we don't do much work because we're constantly, on the lookout. We have no peace, but we do it all day from the beginning, alot hashachar, from the morning rising till tzit kuchavim. Fine. So you see that the end of the day there is defined as tzit kuchavim. The Omer, and further it says, the next pasuk, v'hayu lanu halayla lemishmar. You had some words. The night will be mishmar. Sorry, there's no lamed. The night will be our watchman. V'hayom melacha. Those words are, I don't know if you have them on the left, but it's the end of the pasuk. Is that the day is when we work. So you see that the period that we work is called alot hashachar ad tzit kochavim. So you see that the work day, quote unquote, the yom starts at alot hashachar. Now it's bidi avad, because really, ideally, the light, the sun is what defines the day, but bidi avad, you can call it from the morning. Says Ramaiva Omer, why do you have to add that second pasuk? Because v'chitema, you could have said, the first pasuk only said that we worked from Amud HaShachar until Tzeta Kochavim. But you might have said, v'chitema, misha'ala Amud HaShachar lav yamama, it's not the day, v'chi arvi shimshi, when the sun goes down, lailahu, but inu maktamim machashchi, they got up early and were late, meaning they had to get there before the day because they had to get there early. Tashma hayelanu halayla mishmar v'yom melacha. So that's why we quoted the second pasuk to say that we defined our nights as watching and our days as working. What did we define as our work day? Me'almud hashachar until tzeta kochavim. And so that's how you know that almud hashachar till tzeta kochavim is considered to be bidi avad, considered to be day. The chatchila, the day is not that long, and it's really from when the sun rises in the morning until the sun sets at night. Okay, that's the end of this Gemara. We had the same exact Gemara in the beginning of Brachot in discussion about when you read Shema, right? The same exact Gemara. Continues the Mishnah. The next halacha about Megilah is you started. We said ideally Neitzachama Bidi Avad Alot HaShachar. How long can you read it for? Says the Mishnah, Kol Hayom Kasher LeKriyata Megilah. You can do it all day till the end of the day. There's no. That means Riza Makdimin. You should do it earlier, of course, but the mitzvah is all day long. Okay, that's for everything. Kriyata Megilah, Kriyata Hallel, which is a mitzvah all day. L'tkiyata Shofar, you can blow the shofar all day of Rosh Hashanah. Nitilat Lulav, the mitzvah of shaking the lulav. Tfilata Musafim, you can daven Musaf all day until the end of the day, and the Musafim themselves in the Beit HaMikdash, that can be done all day. Vidoy HaParim, saying the Vidoy and the Parim, Rashi says is referring to all the Parim, including the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibor, right? The Parim that were brought by the Kohen Gadol, the Par that was brought by the Tzibor if they did a sin. All of that, the Vidoy is done during the day. Le Vidoy Ma'aser, remember this is when a person goes out and says, I've given all the Maaser, I've taken everything I'm supposed to take. That has to happen during the day. Le Vidoy Yom HaKippurim, on Yom Kippur, the Vidoy, probably the Vidoy of the Kohen Gadol, right? That's in the pasuk where he says on Hashem kind of things, right? So that's on during the day. It doesn't say in the pasuk on Hashem, right? But chiper ba'ado v'ad beito, right? U'lesmicha, the mitzvah to lean on an animal before you bring it as a karban. L'shchita, to shecht an animal. Tnufa, which is waving the mincha, right? That's what there was a mitzvah of tnufa. Hagasha, which is bringing it close to the mizbeach. This is referring to a mincha, to a flower offering. Kmitza, just taking the portion. Haktara, which is burning it on the mizbeach. And then we get to birds, all the things you do for a bird. Mulika, which is breaking the neck. Kabbalah, accepting the blood. Hazaya, sprinkling it on the mizbeach. Hashkayat sota, giving a sota to drink. These are again all the mitzvot. Arifata eglah, breaking the neck of the eglah rufa, right? Which remember they did when they found a body and they didn't know where it was from and which city was responsible. Taharat HaMitzorah, and when a Mitzorah on their 8th day, right after they do 7 days of tahara, and then the 8th day they bring their karbanot and they get sprinkled on their ears and they become tahar. That's all during the day, okay, and all day long. Those are all mitzvot of the day. We'll go through them in some detail, but not too much. What are the mitzvot of the night? Kol halayla kasher l'ktsirat omer, for cutting down the omer. Remember, they brought the carbon omer in the morning, like all karbanot, but they cut it down at night. That has to be done at night, which is, at least according to Tosfot here, why we only make a bracha when we count ksirat omer at night, right? Because it's in commemoration of cutting down of the omer. And so when we make our bracha, we are counting to that. And so you only can make the bracha at night, according to Tosfot. It's not, and not everyone agrees with that, right? But that is Tosfot here. Hakter chalavim va'evarim, and burning the parts on the mizbech, which also was done at night and can be done all night. And again, if you recall, the Mishnah in Brachot talked about whether, although it's a mitzvah, all night, right? Whenever they said it was till chatzot, it's really all night, but they made a gzera that you shouldn't do it too late. But this was also true about Hekter chalavim va'evarim. Zeh klal davar shemitzvato b'yom kasher kol hayom. Anything that's a day mitzvah, you can do all day long. And davar shemitzvato b'layla kasher kol halayla. Okay, very straightforward. Ask the Gemara Megilah. How do you know? How do you can read the Megillah all day long? Damar kra v'hayamim ha'ela niskarim v'naasim. These days are to be remembered, and that implies to us, again, it's not so clear what the drasha is from, but presumably it's from the fact that it says yamim in the plural, and that tells you that you can do it all day long, right? The whole day is kosher. Hallel, how do you know Kriyat Hallel? Sorry. Tichtiv, because it says Mizrach Shemesh Ad Nevo'o, right? That we praise God from the rising of the sun till it goes down. So that's literally the whole day. Rabbi Yosef Omer, it says another pasuk in Hallel, over the end of Hallel, Zeh Hayom Asa Hashem. So again, this implies the whole day. It's not the beginning of the day, it's the entire day. L'tilat lulav, tichtiv, again, we're seeming to prove all of these from the fact that it says the word yom, which is non-specific. It doesn't say morning, it doesn't say afternoon. It's just the day. So any time in the day. How do we know about lulav? N'tilat lulav. Tichtiv l'kachtem lechem b'yom harishon. Again, the word yom. Tkiyat shofar. How do you know that the shofar is all day? Tichtiv yom trua yeh lechem. And that's where we learn about the shofar. It's a day of trua. The musafim tichtiv, because it clearly says dvar yom b'yomo. That you do each thing in its day. Again, implying all day long. Tfilat musafim. The prayer doesn't say anything about it in the Torah, of course. But that's Kimusafim Shavi Rabbanan, right? The whole takana of Tfilat Musaf is corresponding to the carbon. So it should be the same time as the carbon. Levidoi Parim. How do you know that when you say Vidoi on the par of the Helen Davar, the Parkoin Mashiach, that it has to be during the day? The Yol of Kapara Yom Kippurim. We learn it from Yom Kippur, where you also, of course, say Vidoi. The Tanya Gabi Yom Kippurim, Chiper Bado Va'ad Beito. And that's clearly talking about the kapara tvarim hakatuv medaber. It's talking about kapara with words. The kapara b'yimamahu dichtu. We know that kapara happens during the day. Dichtiv b'yom hazeh yichaper alechem. On this day, which is the day of Yom Kippur, you get the kapara. So yom and is referred. So kapara always refers to the day, and all vidoy is learned from there. How about or vidoy on a carbon? How about vidoy maaser? We're like 10 lines from the bottom. Because in the Vidoy Ma'aser that you say, right, when you bring, it says you bring the things to the Beit HaMikdash, and the end of the third year, you say this Vidoy, right, Bi'arti HaKodesh Min HaBayit, etc. And we'll quote it now. You say in front of Hashem your God, Bi'arti HaKodesh Min HaBayit, and then the next pasuk, or the continued pasuk is, Samach Lei Hayom Hazeh Hashem Elokecha Mitzavcha, on this day. Now, of course, this day is referring to when Hashem commands you, but the hekesh we learn is that you make this vidoy all day long. So the vidoy maaser has to be during the day, and it can be any time during the day. Smicha uleshchita, for leaning on the animal and shechting it. Tichtiv v'samach v'shachat, right, which we've learned out. Tichtiv b'shchita b'yom zivchachem. By shchita it says b'yom. So we learned smicha is similar to shchita, and by shchita it says yom. Uletnufa. What about waving it? Tichtiv b'yom hanifchem et omer. The day that you wave the Omer. And Hagasha, how about bringing it close to the Mizbeach? That's not in the pasuk, but it is a hekesh. Itkish l'tnufa. It's similar, it's comparable to waving it. Tichtiv V'lakach hakohen miyad ha'isha et minchat hakinaot. It says the Kohen takes from the woman the minchat hakinaot, and it continues and talks about her waving it and bringing it close. So you see that the lekicha, the bringing it close, is, sorry, the next words are vehenif, vehikriv, that he will wave it and he will bring it close. And so you see that Tnufa and Hakrava have similar rules, again, in regards to both being during the day. And the next things, Limalika, the Kmitza, Laktara, Lazaya, all these avodot that you do for the karban, to shech the bird, to bring it the blood, to slaughter it. That's the, well, actually not to slaughter it. So one, just importantly, it doesn't say anything about shechita of a karban here, right? That's not included. So, because that's kosher without a Kohen, right? All of that, because it says biyom tzavtot b'nei Yisrael. It says at the end of the karbanot, the day. And so we learn from there that everything that's required by a Kohen for a karban has to be done during the day. Next case was hashkayat sota, giving the sota, the water, the bitter water to drink. That we learn atya Torah. We learn it from the word Torah. It says zot, it says here, vasela kohen et kol Torah hazot. And it says that the Kohen does for the sota this whole story, this whole Torah, this whole teaching. And it says much later in Devarim, al pi haTorah asher yorucha, that you should follow the Torah that I teach you, but al mishpat, right? Asher tomer lasot, laseh, right? The mishpat, ma mishpat biyom, afkan biyom. Now, just like we know that mishpat has to be during the day, which is not something we discussed today. We've had the Gemara before, and Rashi quotes it here, where it says biyom hinchilo et panav, that when you give Yerusha to your kids, you do it during the day, and that's a portion of judgment, of passing out ownership. So just like Mishpat is during the day, so too the mitzvah of Sota has to be done during the day. Let's do a few more since we have a lot of time. Al Rifata Egla, breaking the neck of the Egla Rufa. Amr Dmeir B'yanai, again, it's not a pasuk, but it's because it says kapara tivba, right? It says that you'll get a kapara by doing this. And all kapara has to be kikachim, has to be like getting a kapara from a carbon on the mizbeach. Ul taharat hamitzorah, and for the taharat hamitzorah, that's because dichtiv, because it says zot tiyat taharat hamitzorah biyom taharato. You have to do it during the day, and so again, we learn from all of these where it says biyom or where there's a hekesh to biyom that it's only done during the day, but it can be done the entire day. Just want to finish the parak. Should we just keep going? Yeah, why not?
Is this an exhaustive list of, or I mean, you know what I mean? Or it's like a representative sample, or I mean, it seems
it's
pretty
a
a lot.
exhaustive list, but there's no such thing as exhaustive, right? But it's
Right.
it's not a representative sample. I mean, it's meant to be pretty comprehensive, as we've seen. Okay, what do you think that's on the list? Let me ask that.
I don't know. That's what I was trying to think.
I'm sure there are things. I don't know that I have any in my mind, but remember, whenever we say a list, we always say kol lasuyemai or lemutemai, right? Any list includes things and excludes things. But let's do the end, because remember, there's Zeh Klal. So Zeh Klal always comes to change. The Gemara is going to go through some things, okay, to add. So it's not exhaustive, but it's so right. So the question is, if you're picking 15 things to say, why you picked, and there's 20, why do you pick this 15? So I don't know the answer. We're going to add a few in a minute, okay? Continues the Gemara. What about the night? Remember, the night only had two things. We're on the fifth line, right? To Amar Mark, Sira Usfira Balayla. Oh, there we go. Cutting it down and counting is at night, but Hava'ah, but bringing the Omer on the Mizbeach is Biyom. Like I said, this is, of course, the source for only making a bracha, a Sfira to Omer at night, which is what we do. It doesn't really say that in our Gemara, just to be clear, right? Because our Gemara says Sfira is Balayla. So this innovation that if you didn't count at night, you could count during the day is really not clear from this Gemara. Tosfos does quote it here and says why he says that. But, you know, a literal meaning of our Gemara might be that if you don't count at night, you can never count again, right? So, but of course, that's not the way we paskin. You count during the day without a bracha, and you could continue counting the next day.
Right. The Korban Pesach has to be eaten at night, right?
The Korban Pesach, well, yes, the Korban Pesach has to be eaten at night, but that's
Right.
not all night, right? Because you got to.
That's true.
Okay, right?
Right.
Well, it's not a machloket. It's still chatzot. Sorry, it's not a machloket.
Right.
The pasuk, right? Continue the Mishnah. The final case that we said was hekter chalavim va'avarim. Dichtiv kol halayla ad haboker. Right? It says HTL Mizbeach, kol halayla ad haboker. So you could do it all night long until the morning, but you have to stop in the morning. You can no longer do it once the morning comes. Now, the Mishnah ended by saying this is the rule, right? What are you including, right? You just told me all these things. So then saying this is the rule, obviously it has to include something. What else is a mitzvah at night, during the day, that can be done all day long? That is an issue of a little bit of debate. Putting, remember, the part of the service of the shulchan, of the showbread in the Beit HaMikdash was on Shabbos. They would put the bezichim of the shemen, of the lavon, of the spices, on the shulchan. They'd sit there for a week and then they take them off and put them on the mizbeach. So those actions of putting them on and taking them off had to be during the day. And that's like Rabbi Yossi. The Tanya, Rabbi Yossi Omer Sileket Yishana Shacharit, they would take out if they took out the old one in the morning, the Siddur at Hachadasha, Arvit Ein Bekach Klum. If they did one in the morning and one in the evening, that's okay. Meaning, it says in the pasuk, right, that should be on the mizbeach, on the shulchan tamid, right? And we talked, if you recall, minachot, that you would put the bread on as you took the bread off, right? They would be very, very careful. But it says Rabbi Yossi, it's not literally, you don't have to do it that way, and that's a machloket, right? You don't have to put the bread on and the bezichim on with the bread here as the other one's coming off. You just have to have it on during the day. So you can take one off in the morning and 5 hours later put on the new one, and then it's considered to be tamid because it's during the day. Anytime during that day counts, as Rabbi Yossi says, "Uman ni mekayem tamid," right? What's the code here? How do I fulfill the pasuk of the fanai tamid? Shelo yehei shulchan below lechem at night, right? That it shouldn't be all night long without bread, but during the day you don't need that bread constantly on it. It can be called tamid even if it's on for most of the day or even some of the day. So that's again it's a dat yachid. Not everyone agrees with that. And that's what our Mishnah is coming to add what Rabbi Yossi said. And then the final thing in the Mishnah was davar shemitzvato b'layla kasher kol halayla la'atuya mai. What's that coming to include? That's including la'atuya achilat psachim. Hanan's example that according to our Mishnah, you can eat the carbon pesach all night. Utulok Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, right? The Tanya, of course, as we had in Brachot, it says la'achlu et basar b'layla hazeh, right? It says eat the meat this night. Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, nemer kam layla hazeh. Nemar lahalan v'arati b'aretz Mitzrayim b'layla hazeh, ma lahalan ad chatzot. That God very clearly says to Moshe, at b'chatzot halayla, I'm going to go across Mitzrayim. Afkan ad chatzot. So according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, from the pasuk, you can't eat the Pesach after chatzot, and our Mishnah is coming to tell you, right, that he's right. That he's wrong, that he is wrong, right? That although Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says you can only eat it until chatzot, the our Mishnah says no, anything that's a mitzvah all night long or during the night is a mitzvah all night long. So it's arguing with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Tosfos discusses here that seems some psachim that we paskin in brachot that we paskin like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So we're not going like our Mishnah, but at least the Tana of our Mishnah felt that it was only till it was all night long. We pass like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, it's only till chatzot, which is of course why we're very makbid to eat afikomen until chatzot, right? If you recall.
Right. How about tefillin? That's one I just thought of.
So tefillin, remember, in their time, tefillin was a constant mitzvah. It wasn't, you wore tefillin always, right? So it's not like an episodic mitzvah.
Right.
Mila.
Which one?
Mila.
So Mila can be done all day.
They talked about Megilah.
Can you do it at night?
No,
You can't do it at night.
Can't do it.
no.
Right, you're right. We didn't repeat it though, but we quoted in the last Mishnah, right? The first Mishnah of today was.
Yeah.
Anyways, I don't know. There must be examples. We'll think some more. Maybe overnight. We'll see.
Maybe they listed every mitzvah in the Torah where it says use the word yom or hayom.
Well, even many in which it didn't say yom. Right. Anyways, tomorrow we'll continue from the new parak. It's 7:30, right? Tomorrow morning, 7:30. Perfect. Then we'll see you about next week. Hope to see you all tomorrow morning. Shavua tov.
Shavuot
I'll give you a call, Lily.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.